The city of Calves was built on iron bones and smoke. Its towers stabbed into a sky the color of soot, each spire humming with the currents that fed its endless machines. At the base of those towers, where the ground was forever damp with condensation from the power lines, the people walked in careful silence. Words had weight here, too much weight. A careless utterance could brand you a criminal. A rumor, a doubt, a whispered suspicion could drag you before the council of truth, where men in pale robes with steel-stitched mouths judged what was fact and what was corruption. Lyra had grown up fearing her own tongue. Even as a child in the archive halls, she was trained to recite only what was written in the state registers, never to speculate or question. She was bright, though, bright enough to see patterns others ignored. She knew when the machine sang wrong. She could hear the faint hitch in the hum of the generators, the uneven flicker of the plasma conduits. And when she compared those irregularities to the data in the restricted scrolls, her heart clenched. Something was failing, the grid was faltering. The city's endless hunger for power had eaten into its own lifeblood. She found records of collapses long ago, disasters buried beneath layers of censored ink. The council had hidden the truth for centuries, branding any mention of decay as blasphemy. But Lyra could not unsee it. She could not keep silent. One night, after weeks of restless studying, she spoke. It was not in rebellion, not in public, but in the whispering dark of her friend's quarters. "The city's core is dying," she told him. "We are living on borrowed sparks." Her friend stared at her as though she'd grown another head. Then his face hardened. Within hours, guards dragged her from her bed. The tribunal chamber smelled of iron and ash. The council sat on high-backed thrones of black stone, their eyes glimmering with pale light. The chief arbiter unrolled the charge scroll. "Citizen Lyra of the archive halls, you stand accused of falsehood. You have spoken corruption into the ears of others. You claim that the grid falters, that the core decays. Do you deny this?" Lyra's heart thundered. Her lips parted and her voice came trembling but clear. "I do not deny it because it is true. The evidence is written in the registers. You know this. You have hidden it." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. The arbiter's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened around the scroll. "Truth is not yours to decide, child. Truth is the state's to define. What you claim as evidence is error. What you claim as warning is poison. The tongue that speaks corruption cannot be allowed to wag." She fell to her knees. "If you silence me, the machines will still fail. The people will still die. Cutting out my tongue will not heal the city." But her plea was swallowed by the ritual. Guards bound her wrists and forced her head back. A cold blade glimmered under the chamber's lights. She felt the bite of steel, the gush of copper taste, the tearing agony. Silence. When it was over, she lay shivering on the floor, choking on blood. The council declared her a liar, her tongue, her truth, her voice, all gone. They cast her out through the iron gate into the wastelands that stretched beyond Calves, a place of broken turbines and rusting steel bones. Lyra wandered for days, the wound in her mouth throbbing with every breath. She wrapped her throat in rags, drank rain when she could, and scrawled messages on scraps of stone and metal with chalk she found in abandoned stores. The silence was worse than the pain. Inside her mind, words screamed, but they could find no release. Every passerby she tried to warn recoiled, muttering, "Liar, cursed one," before hurrying away. Even written words carried stigma, for the council decreed that liars spread corruption through all means. Alone, she drifted among the husks of machines. Giant turbines lay fallen like titans slain in battle, their blades cracked and half buried in dust. Old locomotives sat frozen on tracks that led nowhere. She pressed her hand to them, listening for whispers. The machines still hummed faintly, faint echoes of power that once coursed strong. To Lyra, they were like dying animals, breathing raggedly, begging to be understood. On the 7th night of her exile, as she slept beneath the shadow of a fractured tower, she dreamed of fire. She saw Calves shattering, towers splitting, the grid sparking into chaos. People screamed as lights went black. And in the midst of it, she saw herself, voiceless, forgotten, her warnings unheard. She woke with tears streaming down her face. But the city still burned in her heart. She could not stop scratching warnings into every surface she could find. She carved symbols into the sides of turbines, arrows pointing toward cracks in the conduits, numbers indicating decay rates. She scrawled with chalk on walls, "The core weakens. Prepare. Listen." Most ignored them. Some spat at her. Then one day, as she etched on the metal skin of an abandoned generator, she felt a gaze upon her. She turned to see a man standing a few paces away. He was tall, his clothes patched with oil stains, a satchel of tools slung over his shoulder. His eyes did not hold the fear she'd come to expect. Instead, they narrowed with curiosity as he studied her chalk marks. She froze, chalk clutched in her fingers. He took a cautious step forward, squinting at her drawings. "That symbol? Decay over time? You're tracking breakdown rates, aren't you?" Her breath caught. No one had ever understood before. The man crouched, tracing a finger over the lines she'd drawn. "You're marking stress fractures here and here. You've seen it too." He looked up at her. "The grid's failing." Her eyes widened. Desperately, she nodded. He studied her bandaged throat then, his gaze softening as he seemed to piece it together. "They took your tongue." His voice was not cruel, not fearful, only heavy with sorrow. She nodded again, tears pricking her eyes. He leaned back on his heels, considering her. "Name's Aaron. I fix what the city throws away. Machines, mostly. Sometimes people." A wry smile tugged at his mouth. "You're the first I've met who sees what I see." For the first time since her exile, hope sparked inside her. She pressed the chalk into his palm and gestured frantically to the turbines around them. She drew lines in the dust at their feet, trying to show him patterns, the spread of failures across the grid. Aaron followed her gestures with sharp eyes, nodding slowly. "You've been mapping it, all of it. And you're right, the collapse is coming." He stood, slinging his satchel higher. "If what you've seen is true, the people need to know." Not the council, the people. "But we'll need proof they can't deny." She grabbed his wrist, staring at him desperately, pleading. He gave her a steady look. "Then we'll find it. Together." Lyra's heart throbbed. She still had no tongue, no voice. But perhaps, with this man, she had found another way to be heard. The wastelands stretched wide and cruel, but to Aaron they were a map of possibilities. Where most saw only rust and ruin, he saw puzzles waiting to be solved, remnants begging for hands to coax them back to life. His tools rattled softly in his satchel as he led Lyra along cracked pathways littered with twisted wire. She kept close, her eyes scanning every broken engine, every hollow conduit, as though each one whispered secrets she was desperate for him to hear. In the first days of their partnership, their language was chalk, dust, and gesture. She would drag her finger across metal, scribble numbers into dirt, or tap urgently on steel. Aaron, sharp and patient, learned to read her urgency, the rhythm of her warnings. When she pointed at a turbine's core, he understood she meant fracture. When she drew concentric circles and slashed a jagged line through them, he grasped she meant overload. The communication was imperfect, but it carried weight. More than once, Aaron caught himself murmuring answers aloud, forgetting she could not reply in kind. Each time, she offered him a faint smile that was both grateful and heartbreaking. One evening, after hours spent prying open the guts of a collapsed generator, Aaron leaned against its shell, wiping sweat and grease from his brow. The horizon was painted in dull orange as the sun sank behind the city towers, their sharp edges cutting the sky like knives. Lyra crouched nearby, chalk scratching furiously against a shard of metal she used as a slate. She thrust it toward him. The words were crude but clear. Core failing faster. Collapse soon. Aaron studied the writing, his mouth tightening. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I've seen it. The conduits are more degraded than even I expected. They've been patching them with scrap, hiding the real damage." He tossed a small bolt into the dust with a clink. The council knew. "They've always known?" Lyra's eyes blazed. She scrawled more, chalk nearly breaking in her hand. "They called me liar." He looked at her for a long moment. "You weren't lying. You were the only one telling the truth." He let out a humorless laugh. "That's the real crime in Calvis, truth." She hugged her knees, her eyes wet. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and raw. Aaron reached into his satchel, pulling out a flask. He offered it to her. She drank, water cooling the raw pain that lingered in her throat. The next day, they ventured farther, deeper into the skeleton of Calvis's forgotten infrastructure. There, among shattered pylons, they found an access hatch that groaned but yielded under Aaron's wrench. A shaft descended into darkness. Aaron lit a lantern, its glow flickering over corroded ladders and damp walls. Lyra followed him down, each step echoing hollow against metal. At the bottom, a vast chamber opened. Rusting conduits snaked like veins, and in the center stood a cracked terminal, its screen dead but its core faintly pulsing with power. Lyra's breath caught. She knelt, hands hovering over the machine as if it were a living creature in pain. Aaron whistled low. "Haven't seen one of these in years." "A diagnostic hub. If we can wake it." He knelt, unpacking tools, wires, scraps of copper. Lyra scrambled to help, handing him pieces, tapping insistently at sections that needed repair. Together they worked, hours slipping by in the dim hum of the chamber. Finally, sparks danced across the terminal. The screen flickered to life, bathing their faces in sickly green glow. Data poured across it, readouts, decay percentages, fault lines mapped across the grid. Aaron leaned close, reading. His jaw tightened with every line. "Gods," he breathed. "You weren't just right. It's worse. The core's degradation isn't linear, it's exponential. Weeks, maybe days before catastrophic collapse." He slammed a fist against the terminal, the clang echoing. "The Council's letting it happen. They'd rather silence people than admit failure." Lyra's hand trembled as she touched the screen. Numbers cascaded down like falling stars, every digit a countdown to ruin. She looked at Aaron, her eyes burning with urgency. He met her gaze. "We have to get this data out. Show the people. Not whispers, not chalk, proof. Hard proof." She nodded fiercely, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She began scribbling on her slate. "If people see truth, they rise." Aaron gave a slow nod. "Then that's what we'll do." The days that followed were grueling. They dragged salvaged parts from ruins, piecing together a portable console to carry the data. Aaron's hands were blistered and cut, grease caked into his nails, but he worked with steady determination. Lyra stayed by his side, gathering scraps, drawing maps of weak points, guiding him to caches of old tech hidden in forgotten corridors. At night, when exhaustion pulled at their bones, they sat by fires built from broken wood, their shadows stretching long across the dust. Aaron sometimes talked then, filling the silence with stories. He told her of his childhood in the outer rings, where power shortages were common but always explained away as scheduled rationing. He spoke of his mother, who mended broken tools with a patience that rivaled his own, and of the first machine he ever fixed, a broken fan he scavenged from a scrap pile. Lyra listened intently, her eyes soft in the firelight, though she could never respond in words. She scratched symbols into dirt, smiles, question marks, crude sketches of towers and gears. Their conversations were imperfect but alive, a dance of voice and silence. Once, as he told her about nearly being arrested for fixing an unlicensed water pump, she scrawled, "You are brave," he laughed, shaking his head. "No, just stubborn." Then, after a pause, he added, "But maybe that's enough." On the 10th day, their console was ready. A patchwork of copper, wires, and salvaged glass, it buzzed faintly with stored data. Aaron lifted it, grunting at its weight, and strapped it onto his back. "This will get us past words and whispers," he told her. "Proof that even the Council can't deny." But as they prepared to leave the chamber, distant footsteps echoed down the shaft. Lyra froze, eyes wide. Aaron set down the console, reaching instinctively for a wrench that served as his weapon. Shadows flickered on the walls. Voices carried, harsh, clipped, the cadence of patrols, council guards. Lyra's pulse roared in her ears. She grabbed Aaron's arm, tugging him toward a dark alcove. They pressed against the cold wall, hearts hammering. Lantern light swayed as the patrol entered the chamber, boots clanging. "There," one guard said, pointing to the lit terminal. "Someone's been here." "Orders are clear," another replied. "Saboteurs and liars infest these ruins." We purged them on sight. Lyra's blood ran cold. She pressed closer to Aaron, trembling. He tightened his grip on his wrench, his jaw set. The guards spread out, searching. One drew close to their hiding place, lantern glow sliding across the wall. Lyra held her breath until her chest burned. The guard's steps slowed, suspicion tugging at him. He raised his lantern higher. Before he could peer into the alcove, the terminal behind him screeched, sparks flying as its aged circuits overloaded. The guard spun, cursing. "System failure!" The distraction was enough. Aaron grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her through a narrow side tunnel. They ran, breath ragged, console rattling on his back. Behind them, shouts rose, boots pounding in pursuit. The tunnel twisted, collapsed in places, but Aaron knew the language of machines and ruins. He found the paths, guiding her through like a needle through thread. At last, they emerged into open night. The city's towers loomed ahead, jagged against the stars. Lyra bent over, gasping silently, her throat burning. Aaron steadied her, listening for pursuit. None came. The guards had lost them in the maze. He looked toward the city, its spires glowing faintly with energy. "We can't go back through the gates," he said. "Too many eyes. But there are other ways in. Old tunnels, smuggler paths. Dangerous, but they'll get us close to the broadcast towers." Lyra straightened, chalk already scratching across her slate. "We must. People must hear," Aaron nodded. "Then we go. For truth." And so they set off toward Calves once more, the console heavy with proof on Aaron's back, and Lyra's silent resolve blazing brighter than the city lights. The road back to Calves was no simple march. The wastelands ringed the city like a moat of rust and ash, scattered with relics of machines the council had abandoned rather than repair. Aaron and Lyra moved carefully among the carcasses of collapsed pylons and severed pipelines, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust that never seemed to settle. The city's towers loomed ever closer, their upper spires lost in haze, glowing faintly from the ceaseless current pulsing through their veins. Lyra's heart twisted each time she looked at those towers. They had been her home once, her prison after, and now, perhaps, the stage for her vindication. She tightened the straps of her satchel, inside which she carried bundles of chalk and metal slates scrawled with her frantic notes. Aaron bore the heavier burden, the patched-together console strapped to his back, humming with the stolen data that could tear down the council's wall of silence. They traveled by night, hiding by day in the hollows of wreckage. One morning, as they sheltered inside the rib cage of a fallen turbine, Aaron spread a rough map across the metal floor. His finger traced a jagged line toward the city's foundations. "There are old smuggler tunnels here," he explained. "Half collapsed, most flooded, but if we find the right entrance, we can reach the underlevels beneath the broadcast towers. It's our best chance." He looked up at her, his eyes steady. "It won't be easy. Patrols are heavier than ever. They know something's stirring in the ruins," Lyra scrawled quickly on her slate. "They fear truth." Aaron gave a short, grim laugh. "Damn right they do." He folded the map and leaned back against the turbine's shell, rubbing his temples. "Still, we can't just walk in with this console and expect to plug it in. The towers are locked down tighter than a vault. We'll need a plan." Lyra tapped his arm urgently, then sketched a series of symbols, concentric circles with arrows pointing inward. She jabbed at them, then at the console. Aaron studied her drawings. "A distraction," he murmured. "Draw their eyes outward so we can slip inside." He rubbed his chin, considering. "There are old conduits running along the outskirts. If we overload one, it could draw patrols away. Dangerous but doable." Her eyes gleamed with fierce approval. She snapped her chalk against the slate. Yes. The next night, they put the plan into motion. They followed a collapsed power line that led to a forgotten junction box half buried in rubble. Aaron crouched, prying open its rusted door. Inside, the guts of the machine still pulsed faintly, threads of light flickering across copper veins. He whistled low. "Still alive, eh? Just enough juice to make some noise." He glanced at Lyra. "Once I trigger this, we'll have minutes before it cooks itself. Be ready." She nodded, her hands tight around her slate. Aaron's fingers worked quickly, twisting wires, bridging connections with scraps of metal. Sparks spat, lighting his face in brief flashes. The junction began to hum louder, its old heart straining under the sudden demand. Then, with a roar, light flared up the line, racing into the distance. Somewhere beyond the rubble, alarms began to wail. "Go!" Aaron barked. They ran, weaving through skeletal structures toward the hidden tunnel entrance he had marked on the map. Behind them, the junction screamed, then exploded in a shower of sparks. Patrol lights flared in the distance, soldiers shouting as they swarmed toward the blast. Lyra and Aaron slipped through shadows, hearts pounding. At last they reached a cracked slab of stone half buried beneath weeds. Aaron heaved it aside, revealing a dark shaft descending into the earth. The stench of damp and rust wafted up. "After you," he whispered. Lyra gripped the ladder and descended, the rungs slick with condensation. Darkness swallowed her until Aaron's lantern flickered to life above, casting their shadows along the tunnel walls. The air was thick, humming faintly with echoes of distant machines. For hours, they crept through the tunnels, sometimes wading knee-deep in water, sometimes crawling on hands and knees where the ceiling collapsed. Rats skittered past their boots, and the silence was broken only by the drip of water and the occasional groan of settling stone. Yet Lyra pressed on, her mind fixed on the broadcast towers above, where the truth could finally be set free. At last, they emerged into a vast underchamber. Pillars of stone and steel rose around them, supporting the towers overhead. High above, faint vibrations thrummed, the pulse of the grid itself. Aaron set down the console with a grunt, wiping sweat from his brow. "We're close," he whispered. "The broadcast core should be just above us. If we can reach the control node, we can feed the data straight in. The whole city will see it." Lyra's chest tightened. She clutched her slate, chalk trembling in her fingers. "Then they will know. They will know I did not lie." Aaron met her gaze, his expression softening. "They'll know, and they'll see what the council's done." But their relief was short-lived. As they prepared to climb the maintenance shaft leading upward, voices echoed down the chamber. Lanterns flared in the distance, bobbing closer. Patrols. Aaron cursed under his breath, grabbing the console. "We've been tracked!" Lyra's mind raced. She grabbed his sleeve, pointing toward a cluster of old conduits. She scribbled quickly, "Hide console. Return later." Aaron hesitated. "If they find it, not if we hide well." He ground his teeth but nodded. Together, they pried open a hollow in the conduit wall, shoving the console inside and sealing it with rusted plating. Lyra brushed dust over the seams until it looked untouched. Just in time. The patrol's lanterns spilled into the chamber, shadows stretching long. Aaron pulled Lyra into the shadows of a pillar, holding his breath as boots clanged closer. There were sparks in the tunnels, one guard muttered. "Saboteurs must be near." "Spread out," another barked. "Search every corner." The patrol fanned out, their lanterns sweeping. One beam of light passed so close to Lyra she could see the guard's breath cloud in the cold air. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest, but she forced herself still, silent as stone. Minutes stretched like hours. At last, the patrol regrouped, muttering curses. "Nothing here. Probably rats chewing wires again. Then move. We'll check the northern shaft." Their footsteps receded, the lanterns dimming into darkness. Lyra sagged against the pillar, trembling. Aaron exhaled slowly, rubbing his face with a grease-smeared hand. "Too close," he murmured. Then he glanced at her. "But we're not stopping now." They retrieved the console and began the climb up the maintenance shaft. Rusted rungs groaned under their weight, flakes of metal raining down. Higher and higher they climbed, until faint light spilled from a grate above. Aaron pressed his ear to it, listening. Silence. Carefully, he pushed the grate aside. They emerged into a cavernous chamber filled with humming machines, their surfaces polished and well kept, the inner sanctum of the broadcast towers. Panels glowed with streams of data, screens flickering with controlled news feeds. Lyra's breath caught. This was it, the heart of the city's voice. Aaron set down the console, prying open a panel. "This is where it happens," he whispered. "We feed the data in, and the whole city sees what the council's tried to bury." Lyra knelt beside him, hands trembling as she touched the console's casing. Years of exile, of silence, of being branded a liar, Everything had led here. Her chest ached with hope and fear all at once. Aaron's hands moved quickly, wires connecting, sparks hissing. The console hummed louder, syncing with the tower's core. Screens flickered, static rippling across them. For a moment, Lyra could almost hear her lost voice echoing in the machines. But then, the slam of a door. "Step away!" Guards poured into the chamber, weapons drawn, eyes cold. At their head strode a figure in pale robes, the chief arbiter himself, the same man who had condemned her in the tribunal. His steel-stitched mouth curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "The liar returns," he said, voice dripping venom. "And with her, a traitor who aids her filth." His gaze swept to the console. "Did you think we would not notice? Did you think truth could escape our grasp?" Lyra froze, her blood ice. The arbiter's eyes locked on her, burning with cruel triumph. "Your tongue was not enough, it seems. Perhaps your hands must go next." Aaron stepped in front of her, wrench in hand, his stance defiant. She told the truth. "You're the liars hiding what you've done. The people deserve to know." The arbiter's laugh echoed hollow through the chamber. "The people deserve only order. Chaos breeds when the weak are given truth, and chaos we do not permit." He raised a hand. "Kill them." "Destroy the machine!" Guards advanced, weapons gleaming. Lyra's heart pounded. The console hummed beside her, so close to activation, so close to unleashing the truth she had sacrificed everything for. She had no tongue, no voice, but she still had her hands and her resolve. The chamber thrummed with the raw heartbeat of the city, machines humming with currents drawn from the failing core. Rows of screens flickered in neat precision, each one broadcasting the council's carefully measured truths. And now those same machines stood between Lyra, Aaron, and the soldiers who had come to end them. The chief arbiter's pale robes swayed as he stepped forward, his steel-stitched mouth curling with disdain. "Do you see?" he said, his voice amplified by hidden speakers that carried across the vast chamber. "This is what happens when corruption festers. A liar returned from exile and a fool who serves her deceit. You would poison Calvus with your whispers, but you will die here, and your filth with you." Lyra's knees trembled. She wanted to scream, to cry out her innocence, to roar the truth she had bled for. But her mouth was only silence. Her hands tightened around her slate, chalk snapping in her grip. Aaron's jaw was set, his wrench gleaming in the glow of the panels. "You're terrified," he said, his voice low but steady. "Terrified of the people knowing you've been lying to them for generations. That the core's collapsing and you've done nothing but hide it. You cut her tongue out because you feared her words. But you can't cut out the truth." The arbiter's gaze hardened. "The truth is what we decree," he gestured sharply. "Kill them!" The guard surged forward, boots pounding against steel. Aaron swung his wrench, the clang ringing out as he parried the first blow. Lyra ducked behind the console, her heart hammering, fingers trembling as she yanked open a side panel. Wires sparked at her touch. She had spent months tracing fault lines, mapping decay, learning the hidden veins of the city's machines. She did not need a tongue to make herself heard. She would let the machines speak for her. Aaron grunted as a soldier's blade sliced across his arm, blood welling. He shoved the man back, twisting his wrench into another's weapon. "Lyra!" he shouted, desperation in his voice. "Now!" Her fingers moved furiously, twisting wires, forcing contact where circuits resisted. The console groaned, its patched-together parts whining under strain. Sparks leapt, and for a moment she thought it might collapse. But then, the screens shuddered. Static bled across them, the council's propaganda feeds dissolving into jagged lines. The arbiter's head snapped toward the machines. "Stop her!" he roared. Guards lunged for the console, but Aaron fought like a cornered beast, every strike of his wrench fueled by fury and defiance. Steel met steel, sparks flew, and though he staggered under their blows, he held them back, buying her the seconds she needed. The console screamed, lights flaring as the stolen data surged into the broadcast core. Lyra's hands shook violently, her throat aching as though her lost voice was fighting to return. The screens blazed white, then filled with numbers, graphs, images from the diagnostic hub. The truth. Across every screen in the chamber, the decay of the core spread like a wound. fault lines branching like veins, percentages plunging into red. Then came the hidden records Lyra had uncovered in the archives, dates of past collapses, deaths buried, lies perpetuated. Images of turbines fractured, conduits leaking energy, all patched with desperate scrap, and above it all, the damning conclusion: systemic failure imminent. The Arbiter's face twisted in horror as his city's secrets spilled into the open. "No!" he shouted, spittle flying from his stitched lips. "Shut it down! Destroy the feeds!" But it was too late. The broadcast towers were linked. Across Calvis, every screen in every district flickered to life, displaying the same raw data. Workers in the outer rings, nobles in their high spires, children in the archive halls, all stared as the council's lies unraveled. Murmurs rose into shouts, fear into fury. Lyra's chest heaved, tears streaking her face. She could not speak, but the city was speaking for her now. Her silence had become a roar. The Arbiter drew a blade from his robes, his eyes blazing with madness. "You will not destroy us, liar!" He lunged, the blade flashing toward her. Aaron intercepted, wrench clashing against steel. The two men grappled, the Arbiter stronger than his thin frame suggested. He drove Aaron back, blade slicing dangerously close. Lyra scrambled to her feet, scanning the console. Wires sparked wildly, systems overloading under the strain of broadcasting so much data. The tower shook, alarms shrieking. She realized in a rush the core itself was responding, its failing circuits buckling under the flood. She grabbed a length of severed conduit, electricity crackling faintly along its edges. Hard hammering, she hurled herself forward, slamming it against the Arbiter's blade. A burst of sparks erupted, the shock sending the Arbiter reeling back, his robe smoking. Aaron seized the moment, swinging his wrench in a brutal arc that sent the Arbiter crashing to the ground. The chief writhed, smoke curling from his robes, his steel-stitched mouth snarling. "The people are weak," he rasped. "They cannot bear truth." "You've doomed them all." Lyra knelt over him, her hands trembling as she raised her slate. With sharp strokes, she scrawled, "They deserve truth, even if it destroys us." She held it before his face. His eyes widened with fury, but before he could spit another word, the floor shook violently. The console screamed, sparks exploding as the broadcast overloaded. The chamber's walls cracked, dust raining from the ceiling. "The core!" Aaron shouted. "It's collapsing faster." Lyra's heart lurched. She grabbed his arm, urging him toward the shaft. Together they scrambled as machines tore themselves apart, the chamber collapsing in thunderous chaos. Behind them, the Arbiter's scream was swallowed by falling steel. They climbed, lungs burning, until they burst into the night air atop the broadcast tower. The city sprawled before them, a sea of chaos. Screens across every district blazed with the truth, citizens pouring into the streets in a tide of fury and fear. Shouts echoed, torches flared, and the once unquestioned rule of the council cracked under the weight of revelation. Lyra staggered to the edge, gripping the railing. Her chest heaved as she gazed down at the rising storm. For so long she had been silent, condemned, discarded. Now the whole city roared with her truth. Aaron limped beside her, blood soaking his sleeve, his face pale but fierce. He leaned on the railing, looking at her with weary pride. "You did it," he murmured. "They know now." "You were right all along." Tears blurred her vision. She touched her throat, the scar where her tongue had once been. No voice rose from her, but she no longer needed one. The machines, the city, the people, they carried her voice now. Below, the council's soldiers tried to hold the crowds back, but the tide was unstoppable. The people surged toward the council halls, fury in their voices. A reckoning had begun, one born not of lies, but of the truth Lyra had bled to deliver. Aaron turned to her, his expression softening. "Whatever comes next, collapse, revolution, we'll face it together." No more silence. "No more lies!" Lyra's hand found his, squeezing tightly. For the first time in years, she felt whole, even voiceless. Her silence had been her prison. Now it was her strength, and as the city of Calvis shook with both rebellion and the failing heartbeat of its machines, Lyra stood tall, her truth blazing brighter than the towers themselves.